Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's weekly walk. My name is Carla, and today's weekly walk on Wednesday, March 8th. Today, happy International Women's Day and happy Women's History Month. On our weekly walk today, we're going to be visiting the Conservatory Garden, and we'll get to learn a little bit about who Lynden Miller was, as we would love to sort of center and feature the many women who have been involved in the development and restoration of Central Park. And before we get started, just a few of our normal housekeeping bits here. So don't forget that you can use your Zoom feature to communicate with us. So as many of you are already doing, feel free to use the chat function on your Zoom toolbar to say hello, or share something that you'd like, a memory that you have perhaps in the park. And if you have any questions for us, please be sure to use the Q&A feature. And my colleague Desiree is on the back end with us today to answer your questions. And of course, you can also use the closed captioning feature as well, should you need it. And we will be launching one poll during our weekly walk today to get a sense of what you guys really enjoy in the Conservatory Garden. Now, of course, the mission here at the Central Park Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. And on our walk today, we're pretty zoomed into the map today because we're not going too far of a distance. We're going into the Conservatory Garden and doing a little wander around the northernmost garden, seeing some other elements, and then taking a quick little trip into the South English Garden, which is now open. And so we are starting our walk today at the East 105th Street entrance. And we often talk about the named gates or the gates of Central Park when we enter the park. And this one is the only one that really is an actual gate, and what a gate it is, right? This is one of the most unique entrances to Central Park. And as some of you may be familiar with, this gate comes from the Vanderbilt Mansion. So the plaque right next door lets us know that this was designed by George B. Post for the residents of the Vanderbilts for their mansion at 5th and 58th Street, and it was presented to us by their daughter. And just to give you a sense of what that gate looked like in front of their mansion, we can see the Cornelius Vanderbilt mansion here, which is sadly no longer standing, and what the gate looked like at that time. All right, but let's get into the park and start our walk. And as soon as we enter the park, we immediately see signs of renewal, both the spring kind and also the Central Park Conservancy restoration kind, as we see some construction vehicles making their way through the Conservatory Garden. But we also see some budding signs of the renewal of spring. And these are the bright yellow buds of the Cornelian cherry dogwood. This is in the dogwood family. It's not actually in the cherry family. But if you have ever seen the flowers that then become the fruits, they do kind of resemble a cherry, and you can actually eat them. You may not pick them off and eat them yourself in the garden, of course, but if a kind gardener should be taking you on a tour and pick one for you, then you may taste them. I have myself. They are edible, a little bit tart. And down on the ground, we see some more signs of spring that any of you who have been visiting Central Park or perhaps other spaces around the Northeast, you've been seeing some snowdrops pop up as one of our earliest signs of spring. Some nice little flowers to welcome us into the garden. Now, of course, at this time of year, we aren't going to see too many flowers. Perhaps it's not the most colorful time in the Conservatory Garden. And as I mentioned, the Conservatory Garden is undergoing a pretty comprehensive restoration. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But at this moment, the center Italian garden in the Conservatory Garden does remain open. And here is an image of some of the construction that is about to start in the northernmost French style garden, which we will still get a little peek of. Now, we mentioned that today's walk is talking about Lynden Miller's Conservatory Garden. And because it is Women's History Month, let's not forget to mention one of the most important women involved in what the Conservatory Garden looks like today. If you're not already familiar with her, Lynden Miller was the gardener who helped to restore the Conservatory Garden very early in 1983. And before she was a gardener, she actually started out as a painter. She was a painter for about 18 years. And she often likes to say that she learned how to garden in her own home, in her own garden in Connecticut. But in fact, she actually studied gardening pretty extensively at New York Botanical Garden, and she studied gardens in England as well for years. But she definitely tested some things out in her own home garden in Connecticut. But then she was able to bring all of that experience in gardening and restoration to her work in the Conservatory Garden when her good friend Betsy Rogers, our founding president of the Central Park Conservancy, when she became the Central Park administrator. So Betsy Rogers tasked her friend Lynden Miller not only with restoring the Conservatory Garden, but also with raising the funds to do it and organizing volunteers and the support to actually carry it out, which was quite a task. And Lynden Miller has been quoted as saying that, I ask people to try and do what they can to make the world more beautiful. That is my motto, and I've tried to do that for 32 years. And clearly she has done that here. But Lynden Miller really believed in the power of creating beautiful spaces that would bring people together. And we get to enjoy that on our walk today in the Conservatory Garden. Now, as I mentioned, we're not in perhaps the height of the Conservatory Garden's beauty at this time of year, but we can still enjoy some of its beautiful lines and some of the hedges here and evergreen colors in the Conservatory Garden. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll to find out what you folks enjoy most about the Conservatory Garden when you visit. And I'll let you know the results in just a little bit. Now, in the Italian garden, we see one of the hedges is a type of yew. And when we look very closely at the yew, we get to enjoy its very tiny little seed cones that will later become those sort of red berry-like, similar to fruits that will appear. And they just add another little pop of color, as small and tiny as they are. And of course, there are benches throughout the Conservatory Garden, just as there are throughout the park. And this plaque invites us to sit, relax, and enjoy. So let's just take a very brief sit while we're in the garden. Let's follow the directions of the bench and enjoy this view of the beautiful green of the yew. And I really love these crabapple trees, even when there aren't any blooms or leaves. Their branches are so interesting and curving. And we'll get up from the bench and keep going on our walk now and enjoy this path. And I really love to catch views of the Conservatory Garden with the hospital up in the background. That was once the Flower Hospital, but is now referred to Flower Fifth Avenue Hospital, but it's now known as the Terence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center. But I love how it looks. It's such a beautiful building rising in the background of the garden. Now, speaking of the hospital, let's be very careful so we don't have to go to the hospital after we injure ourselves on this plant. You can notice if you look very carefully, this is a barberry, appropriately named. Not only do the leaves have these sharp little toothed serrated edges here, but there are also these pretty intense thorns, and these are actual, botanically speaking, accurately thorns, which isn't always true with some plants. But those look like they could really hurt. So perhaps we should keep moving. That plant doesn't want us to get too close, so we'll keep going on our walk here. And as we make our way into the northernmost French garden, does anyone else see a little speck of red there in that otherwise gray tree? It's a cardinal sitting there, adding another little pop of color and a sign of spring on our little walk today. Now, I'm curious, let's see if we can see what folks enjoy most about the garden. And it turns out that many of you said that some of your, in terms of your favorite thing to enjoy in the conservatory garden, are the beautiful flowers. That's about half of you. And many others enjoy the trees, such as some of the crab apples we mentioned, the dogwoods, and crepe myrtles, and others. And no one enjoyed seeing people in the garden. I understand, that's fine. So I'm curious, I'm just going to quickly look at the chat and see if anyone mentioned, okay, I see some of the flowers are magnolias and hellebores, bluebells. We're going to talk about the hellebores, definitely the tulips in spring. Great. Lots of beautiful flowers. So let's keep going and get to see some of those things that all of you mentioned that you enjoy. Now, while the cardinal isn't going to let us get close enough to feel his soft feathers and give him a little cuddle, these very soft buds of the magnolia tree will let us get close enough to feel their fuzzy nature. And of course, these fuzzy buds are fuzzy so that they protect themselves against any frost damage, and still they'll be all ready for spring, like we've talked about with other buds on some of our walks together. And glancing up, we see this kind of dramatic view of the park. It was certainly a dark and cloudy day that time. And I don't know if you can see it clearly, but there were a number of birds all filling this tree. Something must have been going on. I counted about 5 different species of birds all in this tree, and later saw 5 different hawks all soaring above in the sky at the same time. So there's a lot of bird activity for some reason. Perhaps there is some insect activity or something else. But let's keep making our way through the garden. And this view certainly shows us how important this restoration that the garden is undergoing, how crucial it is, because you can really see how our bluestone pavers really need some restoration work. The garden hasn't been really restored in the way that it is now since about 1983, which focused more on horticulture, where we'll be looking more at updating the infrastructure in the conservatory garden. And while there aren't too many flowers in bloom at this time in the garden, we can still appreciate the dried forms of some of the flowers that were here previously, including these hydrangeas. I still think they have a beautiful color, kind of a golden tan, and a really cool structure and shape. And even close, they almost look like a dried flower arrangement. Now, we can't enter the garden without giving the fountain a little visit, so let's take a quick look at the fountain. Of course, there's no water this time of year, but the ladies here, the 3 maidens, are still laughing and they're still dancing. Of course, they'd have to keep dancing in order to stay warm in these winter months with the outfits that they're wearing. And as this plaque reminds us, this was a gift. This is known as the Untermeyer Fountain. And once again, it was donated by children of a wealthy estate. And it was a memorial to the lawyer and civic leader, Samuel Untermeyer, and his wife, the cultural patroness and suffragist, Minnie Untermeyer. And something interesting about Minnie Untermeyer, she often, she supported the women's right to vote, and she often enlisted her very successful lawyer husband to help support her mission in getting the votes for women, the right to vote for women. But let's keep moving on our walk. And we'll make our way back into the center Italian garden and make our way up the steps to appreciate the pergola. And I really like the pergola, even when there aren't any leaves, and appreciate the wisteria vines, even when there aren't any flowers or anything. They're really interesting structure, although I will say, if you have ever dealt with wisteria yourself in your own life, it is quite challenging. It really grows almost like a weed and is hard to maintain, which you can see it is also done here. It's completely entwined itself into the structure of the pergola. If you look very closely, it is really deeply in there, which is just the nature of wisteria. And also something to notice if we look down at our feet, while we're standing in the pergola, there are 13, there are 13 stones commemorating the first original 13 colonies of America. And I snapped a picture of Massachusetts, as this is the state where I grew up, even though New York is now my home. And this is one of my favorite views in Central Park, is looking out from the pergola, even if it's a little more dreary and almost, once again, kind of dramatic, with the dark shadowing of the wisteria vines and the cloudy skies. And as we make our way down from the pergola, we get to appreciate a little glimpse of the topiary work here in this part of the garden. And right by our heads, we also notice a little reminder of spring. Even if it's not currently being used or occupied, we have a little bird's nest here right next to us. And then as we make our way down and we're walking past this patch of mostly just ground ivy, we see a little splash of purple. And upon closer inspection, we see we have crocuses coming up. Now they're just a tad early. They usually bloom a little bit closer to the end of March, sometimes even early April, but what a beautiful reminder that spring is just around the corner. And we'll make our way down this other alley of crabapple trees. And we see the steps, and we see that once again, the English garden is open, and I have not been in here since the construction started. So I'm excited to get in and see a peek, and I hope you are too. Now, once again, perhaps not its finest hour. A lot of things are covered up or still coming back from winter time, but I think we're still going to see a few nice little pops of color and reminders that this is a gorgeous garden filled with so many flowers and beautiful plants. And right away, actually welcoming us at the entrance by our feet are some hellebores, which I saw someone mentioned in the chat, which are also one of my personal favorites. Let's take a better look. There are many hellebores throughout Central Park that I've been enjoying right now. Some people call these winter roses. They're not actually roses. They're a different kind of flower. They're not in the rose family, but they are these gorgeous flowers that come in a few different colors, and they're known for blooming in winter or around this time of year. So a really nice flower to enjoy at this time. And speaking of pops of color, we also have this iris. I believe this is an Iris reticulata, perhaps a dwarf variety, but these are some really beautiful irises. And I didn't know this, but Iris was the Greek god of the rainbow. And speaking of rainbows, we get to enjoy almost a rainbow of different colors in these various irises that are included in this bed in the Conservatory Garden. Lots of different blues and purples. And these I love, almost have like a yellowish green and yellows in there. Really pretty colors. But we'll pick our heads back up and keep making our way through the Conservatory Garden. And we have some more hydrangea to enjoy. This is a different kind of hydrangea than we saw before. This is an oak leaf hydrangea, and they have a different shape, but really interesting even into winter. And I like how the colors kind of echo the colors of the buildings and the trees behind them. Now we only have a few minutes left, but we don't want to leave this garden without visiting the fountain. So let's not miss visiting our friends Mary and Dickon of the fountain. And look at these new bluestone pavers. So this is part where almost all of the restoration work has been completed, and you can really see a difference from some of those other pavers we were looking at elsewhere in the garden. So you see the real improvement that's happening in this restoration project by the Conservancy. And here are our friends. Go get a closer look. And here they are. These are the characters Mary and Dickon from The Secret Garden, which was one of my very favorite books as a kid. This is also sometimes called the Burnet Fountain, as it's a memorial to the author Frances Hodgson Burnet, who was the author of The Secret Garden. And these were two of its main characters. And I think on this International Women's Day and Women's History Month, it's important to point out that Frances Hodgson Burnett actually earned her living through her writing, at times supporting her family, and at times even supporting the various men in her life through her earnings as a writer, as a very successful writer. And to end our walk today, I want to include a quote from The Secret Garden that for me reminds me of Lynden Miller, who we spoke of earlier and is so central to the original restoration of the Conservatory Garden and how we imagine it and see it today. The quote is, "At first, people refuse to believe that a strange new thing can be done. Then they begin to hope it can be done, and then they see it can be done. And then it is done, and all the world wonders why it was not done centuries ago." And that really reminds me of Lynden Miller being able to come into the garden that no one, and bring it to a state that no one thought was possible, and they weren't sure what would happen when she did it. And now we have this gorgeous garden to enjoy today. And of course, the Conservancy continues the ongoing maintenance and restoration of the garden in the project that's happening now. But as I saw Desiree clarified, yes, the Conservatory Garden is open. You can always check our website to confirm which parts are open and which parts are under construction. But we have finished our walk for today. And I want to thank everyone very much for attending the walk with me today. And I also want to just remind you of a special tour that we're offering this month, the Hidden History of Women in Central Park tour, where we will try to center the very important role of women in Central Park from its very beginnings. And some of the stops on our tour include Bethesda Terrace, Woolman Rink, Doris C. Friedman Plaza. So definitely join us for that. I'll be leading those tours, so I hope to see you then. And Desiree will share a link to that tour in the chat. And we also invite you to check us out on social media, but I want to thank everyone for joining me again today. I'll keep this open for a little bit longer in case you have any other last questions. Otherwise, thank you again. And thank you on behalf of everyone here at the Central Park Conservancy. Stay safe and be well, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you, everyone.